Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We're watching Season 5, Episode 14, The Variable. It is a Daniel Faraday episode.
It's also one of Sammy's all-time favorites. We have lots of questions for him. But after that, we will have the first part of our interview with Mark Pellegrino, who played Jacob.
Yeah, and he doesn't show up on screen for a couple more episodes, but I actually think this episode is a good place to start discussing Jacob-related things, so we will get into that. We start every episode of The Hatch with our hottest of takes about the episode in question. Rosie, what do you got on The Variable? What's your hot take?
So this is maybe a relatively minor moment in the episode, but when, in one of the flashbacks, Daniel is sort of seeing the discovery of fake Flight 815 on the ocean floor, and Charles Widmore comes to see him and, asks him to go back to the island and says that it will heal Daniel. And it seems that it does. Right? I mean, whatever Daniel's experiencing here, he appears to have injured himself, in all of his time travel experiments, or at least that's what I assumed. He does appear to get his sort of memory back and his self back. I mean, is this another instance of island healing?
I mean, he certainly regains the ability to do, advanced mathematics and physics.
Yeah.
It seems to be. That's interesting. It actually seems to be.
Right. I had completely forgotten about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we see it with Locke that the island has the power to heal, and we see with
Rose,
with Rose as well, and
yeah, I know, just an interesting data point. Anyway, Sammy, what is your hot take?
Well, my hot take is much less thoughtful and substantive than that. I just wanted to hone in on something that Eloise says. In one of the early scenes of this episode, where we're getting the aftermath of Ben shooting Desmond and almost killing Penny, Eloise goes up to Penny at the hospital and says, "I believe it's my son's fault that Desmond has been shot." And Penny asks,
"Your son is Benjamin Linus?" "Good Lord, no."
And she says it in this really offended sounding way, like, "No, my son is not Benjamin Linus. Like, no, don't accuse me of that." And what I just find to be so funny about that is, one, as we learn this episode, Eloise is like a really terrible person herself, which is something that we're going to, I'm sure, spend some time discussing. But two, and more hilariously, she's just spent like a significant period of time working closely with Ben to get everyone back to the island. Like, at the very least weeks, maybe months, they've been working closely together, and then she's accused of being his mother, and her response is, "Good Lord, no."
That's
so
funny.
I just thought that was a low-key, pretty great diss of Ben.
That is funny.
Yeah, well-deserved diss, Eloise. Anyway, yes, you said up top, this is one of my favorite episodes of Lost, and that's so true. I think this is I don't want to call it criminally underrated, because I don't actually know how most people rate it, but, it doesn't get talked about like The Constant, or, Live Together, Die Alone, or, Through the Looking Glass, but I think it's right up there. I think this is like a top 5 episode of Lost for me.
Where do you want to start?
Good question.
Well, you brought up Eloise. Maybe that's a good place, since the arc of this episode is really the history of Eloise and Daniel's relationship that we find out was sort of doomed from the beginning. Eloise, in 1977, killed Daniel, found out he was her son, and then I presume had to live all of Daniel's life knowing that.
Well, not only knowing that, but she seems to have structured her life around purposefully leading him to that moment of her killing him.
Right.
Because she is the, temporal police person, as we learn in Flashes Before Your Eyes, and she seems to think it's her duty or somehow incumbent upon her to make sure that this awful thing happens, that her son is led to his death at her own hands. It's quite painful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, she says that to him in so many words a number of times, right? When he's a child, she says, it's my job to keep you on your path. Which is, becoming this great physicist so that you can go to the island one day. She's a complete jerk to his girlfriend, which stinks. Like, that's unnecessary. You can be, like, moderately nice and still force your son to go to his death, I guess. No, you can't. That's completely untrue.
It's not untrue. I mean, she could have been. I mean, what I think is, I mean, there are so many things that are painful about it, but not only does she lead him into what she knows is coming, but she makes his life miserable in the process.
Yeah.
Like, she prevents him from pursuing his passion for music, which, even though we learn in the Flash Sideways that perhaps he's not actually that good at the music thing, he certainly seems to be enjoying that lifestyle a lot more than his physics work. But she takes that away from him. She pretty much uses her influence on him to steer him away from, try to steer him away from any sort of happy relationship. I mean, the one we know about Teresa, like, he's so dedicated to his physics, being influenced by his mother, that he ends up testing his, crazy time travel machine on her, and, leading her to basically be, her mind is racked. She's exactly, as we see back in the Constant with Desmond. And ultimately, even when he's, basically bedridden himself and, under the supervision of, full-time help and unable to do any types of mathematics anymore, she comes to him with that one last twist of the knife to get him to the island. And, the question he asks her is,
will it make you proud of me?
Yes, Daniel, it will.
Exploitative doesn't, do justice to it, but clearly she hasn't just led him along this path. She's, railroaded him, into this very, very, very narrow life that she believes he has to live, to the point where all that's left of his fucked up mind at the end is the desire to make her proud, even after everything she's put him through. Like, that's what she has done to his mind and to his psyche. So no, I mean, you were joking about it, but even if she felt like she really had to get him to the island in the end, did she have to do it that way? Like, I don't know. Probably not. Probably didn't have to make him so miserable.
Yeah, and it does seem in that final conversation before Daniel accepts the Widmore job that she really doesn't want to do it, right? And she's aware of what she's doing. You can see a lot of pain in the actress Fionnuala Flanagan's face. She appears conflicted, but she does it anyway. So I don't know how much sort of credit we give her for that. And I think, we've discussed this with Eloise before, but it seems like she felt like she had no choice. Like you said, temporal policeman. She knows from the beginning of Daniel's life that this is where it's going to end up, and whatever happened, which is awful. And, if we are to be generous to Eloise, which I do not necessarily think she deserves, but she had to live Daniel's whole life, 30 years and change, knowing that. That sucks too. And that's the island's doing, or that's sort of, she chooses to be complicit in this system and not to try to fight against it, but you're nodding.
Yeah, chooses to be complicit. I was thinking about that a lot. And I agree with you, by the way, that's the generous interpretation, which I don't know if she deserves or not. But the question that I had watching this episode is, how did she end up in this role? Did Jacob come to her at some point and tell her, it is on, your shoulders to make sure that all of these things happen the way they were supposed to, or the way they always happened? I don't think we get any indication of that, but it's a possibility. But yeah, I'm definitely watching this and thinking, like, even if she truly believes that this is the way things were always going to happen and there's nothing that she can do about it, she's always going to end up killing her son. Why does she have to be the instrument by which that comes about? Why is she not capable, even if she doesn't feel she's capable of fighting this order of events or stopping it from happening? What's to stop her from just sitting on the sidelines and hoping that it doesn't have to be that way? Or at the very least sparing herself the culpability. Right. Because, she knows that, the way she experienced it, Daniel's last moments of life we're experienced. We're filled with the feeling of, oh shit, my mother this whole time was leading me to my death. That's why I'm dying right now. I mean, I can't think of a worst possible final thoughts to be going through Daniel's head. Why did she have to make sure it happened exactly that way? I mean, from what we see in flashes before your eyes, when she's showing Desmond, she points out the guy in the red shoes and says, "Oh, that's interesting." And then the ladder or whatever falls and crushes him. And Desmond asks, "Why didn't you stop it?" And she said, "Well, it doesn't matter. If I had stopped it, today, something else would have happened tomorrow. It would have been hit by a car. Or it would have, fallen off a bridge or, whatever." What was to stop her from applying that attitude here? Even if she really, truly thought Daniel was destined for death, even if she thought he was destined for death at her hand and there was nothing she could do about it, why did she have to work so hard to bring it about in exactly this way? That, to me, is the cruelest and most sadistic part of it.
Yeah, and it speaks to this kind of total and all-consuming faith in the island or the process or whatever that we've also talked about with John and with other characters. And if even this would not put her off from that, then nothing will. Right? I mean, this is, as you said, sort of one of the most upsetting things, one can imagine. And knowing this, she seems to have chosen to adhere to the island plan, whatever it might be, and we can kind of make up the motive from there. I think because she thinks it's the greater good, because she thinks it's important, because she thinks it's her destiny. Like, there could be all kinds of stuff going on there. But
no, I mean, I think you're right to recognize that in that last final scene when she pushes him over the edge to take the trip to the island, which is like the last thing that's gonna, ultimately that she can do to make sure that this goes down. Like, clearly she is feeling regret and difficulty with it at that point, and maybe when it's come down to it in the final moments when it's feeling more real than it did before, and she's feeling some uncertainty. But you said she still goes through with it. Doesn't stop her.
Yeah.
I think one parallel I want to bring in here, I think this is a good moment to look at Daniel's monologue at the end, which to me is one of the just most brilliant couple of minutes of Lost. It's 2.5 minutes of pure gold with Jeremy Davies just like turning pretty dense exposition into, a totally captivating, theory of how time and free will and destiny work. So I just love that scene, and I should put that out there up front. One thing I noticed in it this time that I hadn't really thought about previously, there's a part when he says,
I've been spending so much time focused on the constants, I forgot about the variables. Do you know what the variables in these equations are, Jack? No. Us. We're the variables. People. We think, we reason, we make choices, we have free will. We can change our destiny.
And I did a double take when I heard him say that, because it reminded me so strongly of what we're going to hear the Man in Black say to Jacob in the finale. Just in terms of the sort of the opposite, sort of not, but just the structure of it. They come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt. It always ends the same. We think, we reason, we make choices, we have free will. We can change our destiny. There's something there, I think, and I have some ideas about what it might be, but I just think that's too close a parallel to be coincidental.
I think the same person wrote it. It's like when a president only has, one highly reliable speechwriter, and all their speeches sort of sound the same, whether they're talking about infrastructure or education or whatever. I think that was just the same writer, but fair enough.
I mean, I don't know about that. I should check to see who the writers were of these episodes, but I guess they have a writer's room. I guess what I think, so often we talk about fate versus free will, and that's what this show is about. But it seems like something a little different here. I mean, I think Daniel is saying, we have the ability to make good choices and to try to help ourselves and to help others. Mm-hmm. And the Man in Black is saying, it's not that he's saying we don't have free will, but he's basically saying we're only ever going to make bad choices. They come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt. It always ends the same. People are always going to choose the thing that leads to the most violence and death and destruction, and there's nothing you can do about that. Whereas Daniel is saying, no, like we have the ability to change our destiny. We can. I think to me the sort of underlying thing in his words is not just we can make choices and we have free will, but we can actually try to better ourselves in our situation, which is what he's trying to do. He's trying to save Charlotte. He's trying to stop the plane from crashing. He's trying to stop Dharma from having to Chernobyl in this electromagnetic energy. I guess and I know I'm trying really hard to make this work, but I kind of think it does. I guess I'm reading something in here that there's a duality that's not just fate versus free will, but is more about what kinds of choices are people capable of making.
I don't think the duality here is so much between, like, do people have the capacity for good or are they more prone to evil? I don't know that I see a value judgment in Faraday's monologue at all. I mean, he says we have the power to change things, and I'm going to detonate a hydrogen bomb so that Oceanic 815 never crashes. But I think the rest of the season is going to be devoted to the question of whether or not that is a good thing. And I think the show is sort of agnostic on the question of whether everybody would have been better off if the plane had never crashed.
Totally fair. Totally fair.
I don't know that Faraday thinks he's doing good here either. I think he's desperate and on the clock and, realizes, he seems to have had this breakthrough and wants to change these things because, I take that back, because he thinks it's the right thing to do. I assume he wouldn't be doing it if he didn't. The man seems to have a moral compass, but.
Right. I think he's especially thinking about saving Charlotte throughout all of this.
Yes, for sure. And that's why he's asking to have the island evacuated and everything else. It's not just about stopping the plane crash, but
what thoughts do you have about the monologue at the end? Since it's my favorite scene, so I could talk about it for 20 minutes. But what did you think?
I mean, Jeremy Davies is tremendous, obviously. Other than that, I struggle a little bit with the explanation of, I was so focused on the constants that I forgot about the variables because, Daniel has been trying to convince everyone that the rules of the game are this: whatever happened, happened. Whatever you do right now, you always did. And, you might think you have choice, but that's sort of artificial. Whatever happened, happened, right? And it's everyone around him who struggles with that idea and says, well, that doesn't make sense because the way I experience the world is that I do make choices. And I can change things. And instead of doing X in this moment, I'm going to do Y. And Daniel says, well, then that just means that you always did Y. Right? And I think it is sort of a profound comment on, the man of science coming to believe that we do, in fact, have an affect on the world that he's sort of defining in this scientific way. But that's how it felt to me.
That's fair. I mean, I don't think that negates when he says, I've been so focused on the constants. Like, yes, that is what he has been focused on, telling everyone that there are these constants.
Right. And everyone else is just sort of coming around to that idea.
Yeah, or they've, it seems like some of the Dharma 1970s folks have come around to this over the last couple of years.
Right.
I don't know. One thing I loved is just when he says the line, I'm going to detonate a hydrogen bomb, which is a fantastic line. He does this pause before saying it, and he's kind of like, and it's the same thing right before he says to Pierre Chang early in the episode, I'm from the future, where he does this pause and he kind of, he does the thing where he moves his head around like Faraday does.
And it's sort of like he's thinking about how to say this and then decides that the easiest way is just to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he also has this like little smile here before he says it. Like he knows how insane he sounds.
Yes.
But I kind of also think that he loves that he's going to actually try this.
As sort of a scientist, I'm sure he does. Because if it works, it's remarkable proof, right? I mean, I don't know how he would sort of know if it worked. But if it works, it's proof of something.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I tried really hard to convince you of my theory. I guess I just keep thinking now that this sort of, is this going to work, this experiment? Like, it's such a straightforward question. Like, either you can change the past
or you can't.
Or you can't. Either we have, I mean, and it's interesting because that was, the question of do we have free will or is everything destined? Man of science, man of faith has been central to Lost even before we got into time travel, right? And time travel is just sort of like a particularly explicit manifestation of this, where now that they're in the past, playing out events that already happened, do they have the free will to make choices that change those events, or is everything literally destined because this already happened? I think it's, it's a very explicit manifestation of a theme we've been dealing with.
Right.
But at the same time, it's just like either you can or you can't. And ultimately what the season tells us, I think, is that you can't.
Right. I agree.
I mean, this stuff always happened. Faraday was always going to die at Eloise's hand.
Right. The incident was always what it is.
Right. It was going to happen. The plane was going to crash. Like, literally, this is not stuff that you can change. But at the same time, I think it's important for us to sort of think about that in the larger mosaic of questions that this show is asking about choice and free will and, people trying to do good versus do evil. Like, there's more to it than just the literal question of, if you travel through time, is it possible to make things happen differently?
Well, so I think maybe the way of framing that feels a little more true to me is like, are you resisting this or are you enforcing it? Like, do you believe you have free will or not? Because, if we accept as true that whatever happened, happened, and, everybody always did what they do here, then that doesn't mean they don't choose to do those things in the moment. It doesn't mean they're like animatrons that are being moved around in a dollhouse by the island. Like, Jack still chooses to sort of go through with Faraday's plan. Juliet still chooses to go back and help detonate the bomb rather than leaving on the sub. They do all still choose these things. It's just that, and they just always made the choice. Like, I don't think those two things are necessarily mutually exclusive, but you have the people who are saying, nah, screw this idea. I'm going to try to act in this moment. And then you have people like Eloise who are saying, I know that, I have knowledge of the way that these things work. I have some insight into what the future is going to be like, and my job is to make sure that those things happen the way that they do. And to your point, even if Eloise had chosen maybe what would have been the side of good here, which is like the side of resistance to destiny, destiny may still have won the day, but that maybe would have been a quote-unquote good choice. Whereas she's not an animatron either, right? She does choose, it seems, to go along with the idea, whether or not she believes that it would make any difference if she didn't. Daniel's been telling everybody this whole season, it won't make a difference if you fight it, and everybody still fights it. And, does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I mean, I think sort of what you're saying is that even if it ultimately ends in roughly the same place, that the choices we make along the way, still matter somehow or still reflect something about us. I mean, we can choose how. Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder so why do the choices matter if it leads to the same place? I mean, why? I mean, I'm pressing you on philosophy now. Like, if things are roughly destined, why does it matter to resist or to not resist?
Well, because I think we are the people that we are, and so Jack is an example of somebody who, when he arrives back in 1977, is like, excuse me, what? I am not going to intervene to save Ben's life. So that's a choice that he makes, and the choice is to do nothing, right? To stay home and to not sort of act. And I think we criticized Jack for that a little bit because it's a little bit out of character for him. And yet, Kate and Juliet chose to intervene, and that led to the saving of Ben. So that little situation, that little microcosm that took place in Sawyer and Juliet's house, all of those people were still making choices. Jack makes the choice not to participate. Kate and Juliet make the choice to participate. That still says things about who they are.
Let me try a slightly altered version of my original pitch to you here, because I think that what you're saying is resonating with me, and I think it's perhaps improving upon and clarifying, how I felt while watching this. I mean, the line that Faraday says is, "We think, we reason, we make choices, we have free will, we can change our destiny." And I really do think that he doesn't just mean we have the free will to make shitty choices. I mean, I think he's talking about the free will to make good choices, and maybe in the context here, talking about we can change our destiny. I mean, he is talking about resisting the established order for sure. I mean, he is talking about, we think these terrible things are fated to happen. Well, maybe they're not so fated to happen, because maybe we can make choices that would prevent them or that would stop them. And I do think I feel more strongly now after hearing what you have to say that stands in, some kind of contrast to they come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt, it always ends the same. So I agree with you. I mean, I think that perhaps the context for this conversation is the question of, are we going to just go along with the established order and let, the forces of, the island or darkness or good or bad or whatever, dictate how things are going to turn out, or are we going to try to do something about that might be better?
Yeah.
And I think Faraday's saying we have the power to do something that might be better.
Yeah. And some of this is the problem of knowing that time works this way, right? Like, nobody had this issue before the time travel started. It was just, in this particular moment, do I have free will, or does someone somewhere already know what's going to happen to me? Does the island know what's going to happen to me? Is the island leading us toward some destiny? And, Jack made choices in seasons 1 through 4, believing that, well, until later, believing that, no, that's bullshit. The island's not leading us anywhere. I have free will. John still made choices. Just because he believed that the island was leading him somewhere, he still, chose to go bang on the hatch rather than help save Boone. He chose to sort of go into the sweat lodge and be led by the island or whatever. It's not like he was just sitting on his hands the whole time. Just because he believed in destiny doesn't mean he wasn't making choices. He was just explaining them differently. And I think that's what I mean about like the whether or not to save Ben scene. All of the people in that cabin made choices. Just some of them chose like, no, I'm not gonna try to save Ben, and some of them chose to say I am gonna try to save Ben. And this is a very like stoner interpretation, and I apologize for that. It's the idea sort of that time is not a fixed line, right? It's not a track on which a cart moves forward and backward. It's more of like something that it's a dimension. It's more like right?
Jeremy Bearimy.
We move in and out of. Yeah, it's not. I think what Lost is saying is that it kind of is that fixed cart on that linear path, right? Because ultimately, Faraday's wrong, and they don't change the past. But within the little cart, they are still having conversations, making choices within the cart, but the cart is going where it's going.
Maybe you know where the cart is going, but are you going to be the person who helps the cart get there, or are you going to try to, send the cart onto a different path? I mean, that's what this seems to be all about, right?
Yeah, but that's not necessarily good or bad. And Eloise thinks that she is, I guess we don't know this, but I assume that she thinks that she is doing good. She thinks she is
I don't think she
maintaining-
thinks she's doing good. I think she thinks she's enforcing the rules of time, even though she knows it's not good.
Yeah, which I think she thinks that she's doing it for some sort of must keep the universe in order sort of purpose, which I think she would say is altruistic. Like, she is making this horrible sacrifice so that sort of Earth stays on its axis, and like, you know, what Jacob says about if the man in black were to get off the island, you know, all hell would break loose. Like, I think that is sort of what Eloise is enforcing, and you're going to say that underlines your point, and I don't think that it does. But
I was going to say, I mean, you're right, I do think that, but I think specifically that even if she thinks what she's doing is altruistic, that she exemplifies. I'm just digging, you know, just leaning into this here. She exemplifies what the man in black is talking about when he says, "They come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt. It always ends the same." I see that as being this very bleak view of human nature. You know, life is nasty, brutish, and short, right? I mean, you know, I think that what the man in black's point is ultimately to Jacob is that people are always going to make, you know, poor, self-interested choices that hurt other people and that lead to death and destruction. And Jacob wants to prove that ultimately that's not the case. I think Eloise is a pretty good example for the man in black, the fact that she does not, you know, make any effort at all to resist this horrible outcome, that she, you know, not only does she not resist it, she enforces it. She thinks it's her job to enforce it. I think that's pretty bad.
yeah, I mean, I think it's objectively bad. But I think she thinks that she is playing, you know, she's playing this role of enforcer that needs to be played.
Everyone who does bad things thinks they're doing it for a good reason.
Sort of.
I mean, unless you're like a psychopath.
Not a good reason, but a reason.
Let's ask our listeners to weigh in on this, because we could keep debating this for quite a while. Am I totally insane? Is there anything to this? You know, do you think that Rosie's right, that it's all about time travel and you know, can you change the past, fate versus free will, or have I seen something else here that you agree with? Call us, leave us a hot take. 9546 Dharma is the number, +1 if you live outside the United States. You can also send us a Facebook message.
I would like to quickly make a caveat, which is to say that I think there are parallels between Jacob and the Man in Black, and particularly between like Jacob and Eloise, and, you know, which we've talked about a lot. I just don't think that the writers were intending that when they wrote these two particular lines. That's all.
I'm willing to concede that there are other interpretations of the two lines, even though I see them as connected, but I still think there's a larger point to be made by comparing them. Anyway, Rosie, I've kind of thrown us off the rails here with this conversation. What else in the variable do you want to discuss?
Oh, I want to talk about how sad I am about Juliet and Sawyer.
Oh boy, I guess we have to do that.
Yeah, it's... Speaking of people who have, like, accepted their fate, it's just so clear that Juliet is resigned to a really sad outcome. Like, she's, like, you know, very ready to flee Dharmaville and go back to the beach if that's what's required. And certainly doesn't seem excited about it, but also doesn't seem that stressed. Like, it's just like, okay, I guess I'll pack up and we'll hit the road in 5 minutes. Like, you know, it's just another upheaval after like a decade of upheavals. And, you know, it does seem that her faith in Sawyer is fraying a little bit, which, you know, the show still wants us to believe is because of Kate.
I know. Well, it's pretty transparent. I mean, it's right after Sawyer calls Kate Freckles,
right,
that
and tells her to
Juliet
come
is like,
with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely quite sad when Sawyer asks her, "You still got my back?"
Yeah.
And Juliet's response is, "You still got mine?" ? And then the moment later when he holds out his hand to her, like, "Let's get going," and she just has this totally resigned look, and she takes his hand, but it's like, she looks like she's just kind of playing out the string.
Yeah.
I mean, the one saving grace for me is knowing that she is wrong and that this Kate thing is a passing trifle, and that these two are going to be, destined destined to be together, in the afterlife. That makes me feel a little better about it.
Yeah, I mean, she is going to die in like 3 hours.
Yeah.
But you're right. The afterlife, we got that.
Yeah. I mean, their love will endure is my only point here.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't the end of their story. It's nice to feel some comfort in that.
Yeah.
I guess that's why people believe in the afterlife.
Well, not to drag us back down into
Please.
the fiery pits of the destiny discussion, but you sort of repeated the word several times during that last bit.
I did.
To have free will and to live in a way that expresses free will, you have to believe that it has meaning, and you have to believe that you can change things. Because if you don't believe that it has any result, then you will just, like, what's the point of doing anything? The feeling I expect I would have if that were the case is the feeling that I see Juliet displaying here, which is just sort of like, I guess we're getting thrown out of Dharmaville. I guess we always got thrown out of Dharmaville. This sucks. What happens next is probably also going to suck. I feel like part of sort of human nature requires us to believe that we can inflict, affect some sort of change. Otherwise, you would just...
I mean, and I'm going to go back to this well for just 1 second, and then I promise I'll try to move on. I mean, the Man in Black says it always ends the same. And, I think that is, a version of what we're discussing here. Nothing matters. It always ends the same. Right? I mean,
I think it depends on your frame of reference, right? So when I was like in 4th grade and I learned about motion, I have a vivid memory of learning about motion in science class. And the teacher had asked, if you're sitting on a Ferris wheel that's going round and round, are you moving? And I remember having this realization that was like, well, it depends on where you're looking. If you're looking down at your hands, no, you're not moving. You're sitting perfectly still. If you're looking out there, you're moving pretty fast, and it can be kind of scary. And I think that is a little bit what's happening here in the difference that you're describing, like from Jacob's perspective, or maybe even from Eloise's perspective. They're taking this very, very long view of history, right? And saying, like, in the Man in Black's case, like, they come, they fight, they destroy. That's been happening over and over. It's going to happen again. But for the people living that, for the people that Lost is about, all the main cast of this show, the survivors of Oceanic 815, they don't exist in that frame of reference. They're down here. And they are living this. And it has enormous meaning to them because their frame of reference is one person's life. And, Daniel, one of the weird things about Daniel is that he's sort of moving between those two worlds. Like, he does have this sense of, oh my God, this is huge. This is like these challenges that I'm approaching are massive in scope, and he has sort of a sense of that world, but is still also existing down here on sort of the human person-to-person level with you and me. And of course, as a person, you have to believe that you can change things. And that's the difference, I think, between those two things. And that's what makes me think that they're not the same, is that the Man in Black is on the frame of reference that's outside the Ferris wheel, and everyone else is on it.
Yeah. I mean, you might very well be right here. And one comment that makes me think that you're possibly more on target than I am. I mean, Jacob is not exactly on the other side of this. He is also, I think, looking at this from his comment is, it only ends once. Anything before that is just progress. I mean, I think he's also sort of dismissive to these, the stuff happening inside the cart that you described. I mean, the individual choices that are being made and how they affect, real people, or how they reflect on real people. I mean, he sees them as, progress towards what he would consider to be, a positive and arguably predetermined ending of his own choosing.
Right. Right.
Rather than something that matters in and of itself.
Right. And the people like Eloise who choose to adopt that frame of reference, come off as like hugely cold and calculating and disaffected because they've sort of chosen not to participate in these day-to-day affairs, right? They are taking that higher frame of reference, whereas, for Jack is the character who I think displays this most urgently, but like every decision is a huge decision because they're experiencing it here and now. And, I don't think the existence of a destiny makes any of what happens in that cart any less valuable,
I do. Maybe more so than being oppositional to what the Man in Black has to say. Maybe Daniel's attitude here is more oppositional to the entire Jacob versus the Man in Black framework. I mean, both of them are trying to control people's lives and destinies to a certain extent, and Jacob maybe is always talking about people having choice and free will. He emphasizes that a lot in season 6, but as I'm sure we'll have discussed and will discuss, he's also trying to push people towards the choices he wants them to make.
Right, and spend indeed
hard.
Their whole lives leading them toward those choices.
Yeah, much like Eloise, who you put in the category with Jacob. So, yeah, interesting. Maybe part of what's going on with Daniel here is just fuck you to all of that. I mean, what really matters is people and the choices we make rather than these outside forces.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and for Jacob to say, you have free will, but you have free will to make this precise decision within this set of circumstances that I have orchestrated very carefully. Like, is that free will? That's for season 6.
We should, there's a little more to discuss this episode, but maybe considering where we are in the conversation now, we should turn on Mark Pellegrino and let people hear what he has to say about all this.
I agree with that. We spoke with Mark a few months ago. Delightful conversation. We won't set it up too much because it's great.
We are here with Mark Pellegrino, who of course played Jacob on Lost, a character that needs no introduction. Mark, thank you very, very much for being with us on The Hatch.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start all the way back at the beginning, with keeping in mind this was, 11 or 12 years ago at this point. How did you get cast on Lost?
Oh, so I had 4 auditions the day that I was supposed to read for Lost. They were all dramatic auditions, and the Lost sides were 7 pages long. And I turned to my wife and I said, I can't go up for this show. It's just too many pages. I've got too much other stuff going on. I'm going to have to say no to this. She said, you better go in on this show because it's like the hottest show on television. And and I'm like, yes, I know this. This is why I'm not going to go in. I don't have time to prepare 7 pages of material. I'm not going to go in there and make a fool out of myself and screw it up. But she convinced me to go in anyway, and somehow I was able to cobble together some rehearsal time on the piece and went in there and rehearsed, did it, in front of them, and didn't hear anything it was a good audition. It was really fun. It was the scene, it ended up being the scene between the Man in Black and Jacob on the beach, more or less, a version of that, but, different names, of course. And I thought it went very well. And I didn't hear anything for 3 weeks. Then suddenly I did. They want you to go up there and play this part. They didn't tell me the part, though. I didn't know what the part was. My wife, who had been watching the show, she says, "I bet I know what part you're going to play." And I hadn't watched the show, so I said, "What part? Tell me, what part you think I'm going to play?" She said, "I think you're going to play this part of this character called Jacob." I was like, "What?" I didn't know anything about how secret the scripts were and all that, so I was like, "Well, that wasn't the character that they gave me," and I don't know, and so I flew to Hawaii, not knowing what I was going to play. I don't even remember if I had a copy of a full script at the time or not yet. But when I landed, I think I went to the set. I went to go to wardrobe, and I think I had to go to the set to meet the person for wardrobe. And I believe Michael Emerson was like the first person I saw, and he's like, "You're our Jacob." And that's how I found out that I was going to be Jacob. And and so I'm glad I didn't know that beforehand, because had I known, I think I would have been really nervous about going in there, because the part was, carried the secrets of the island on his shoulders. Right. And, he'd been built up, for a while beforehand. There was so much anticipation, in fact, that one of my students who also became a friend of my wife and myself.
Acting student, presumably.
Acting student, right?
Yeah.
She was so into the show, and when she saw me come on as Jacob, she's like, "Oh my God, Jacob's Mark Pellegrino," and she couldn't get into it because she knew me as a person, and she'd been waiting so long for Jacob. It sort of was like a buzzkill for her.
Man,
that's
so you hadn't been watching the show yourself?
Correct.
Wow. I got to tell you, as a fan, just the way your character is introduced, like sort of with no warning whatsoever in the first sequence of the finale of the penultimate season, it was quite mind blowing. I mean, I assume you've seen it. It's a great sequence.
Yeah, I love that. That scene, that reveal scene with me and the Man in Black, I think is really great because they just drop it. They just drop it on you, and you're like, "What the fuck?" So
yeah. At what point did you find out that Jacob was this godlike figure who carries, like you said, all the secrets of the island, who's been teased for 3 or 4 years? How was that explained to you?
It was never explained to me except during one scene. I think I was with the young Kate in a scene, and Jack Bender, the director producer, one of the executive producers of the show, saw something that I did. It was early on in the work, and he saw what I did. And he's like, "That's it, Jesus the Carpenter. That's it." And it just so happened that idea really resonated with me. I was a former Christian, and I got really into the idea of Jesus the Carpenter and the Master and the Margarita, and this very humble but all-knowing, accessible being, and it just really resonated with me. But that's the only note that I ever got with respect to Jacob. And I worked with Carlton Cuse later on in a show called The Return, and we never really talked about the dynamics too much.
Huh. Well, I was going to ask, Rosie, you being our in-house expert on all things Jesus and Christianity here, does that ring true to you?
I mean, of course, there's so much, light and dark duality of man stuff going on with Jacob and the Man in Black that it definitely tracks.
I mean, I thought he was quite a bit more flawed. I never envisioned Jesus the Carpenter as, killing a brother or, having those kind of emotional fissures that he had, but, and so many things tearing at him in different directions. But I imagined Jesus the Carpenter is a lot more solid, but just accessible.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because one of the things that and this is jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves here, that I did want to ask you about, I mean, that the way they're, presented at a surface level is, Jacob the light side and Man in Black the dark side, but obviously it's more nuanced than that. And as we learn in the backstory, both characters have, their virtues and their flaws. I guess I'm just curious how, looking back, how did you understand, the conflict between these characters or what was going on? Like what as an actor was in your head as you're thinking about here's my problem with this guy and what I'm really all about, in this conflict?
Well, I mean, I saw the conflict as between altruism and self-interest. It seemed like, the Man in Black wanted to explore the world. He wanted to see. He wanted to know. He wanted to touch things. And Jacob had a larger, quote unquote, purpose. His purpose he saw as not about himself, but as about this wider sort of goal. And I thought that was the main struggle between the two, where they had their differences, was that Jacob felt that his life was more or less, how do I say it, more or less like a cog, a tool for this wider purpose, and the Man in Black didn't seem to want that at all. And so that was the conflict between the two of them.
What I like about that, besides from just it being more nuanced than just good versus evil, is I rewatched Across the Sea last night, and I hadn't, I've rewatched a lot of Lost. I'm a big fan, but that was an episode I hadn't watched probably since it aired, and I was a lot more sympathetic to the Man in Black than I would have thought. I mean, his desire to just go and, as you said, it's self-interest. He wants to go live his life and see things and not be trapped there. I empathized with that, and even though he was not a good man in a lot of ways, I was watching it partly thinking, gee, does Jacob really have to keep him here? Would it be that bad to let him, go somewhere else?
Well, see, when I would listen to Titus say those things, I would think to myself, sounds like a noble aspiration to me. I have no problem with you leaving and doing your thing, but I have a very different moral orientation than Jacob had, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not like they were raised in stability either. I mean, we saw the mother was a fanatic. I mean, from what I remember, it's been so long, and I haven't revisited the episodes in a long time, but she was a fanatic. And you have to imagine people two poles growing up with under the umbrella of that fanaticism. One is going to be a convert, and the other is going to be a rebel. And that's sort of the way it was, you know, the convert versus the rebel. Sort of like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Frailty. You ever see the movie?
No.
Oh man, you got to see the movie Frailty. I'm a horror movie freak.
I avoid horror movies like the devil.
No, but it's a good one. I avoid slasher horror movies. This is actually a good one with a killer twist. Matthew McConaughey's in it, Bill Paxton. It's about a guy who gets a vision from the archangel Michael. He thinks, right, that he has to go out and kill demons. But from the outside, he looks like a serial killer, and he's got two kids that he's taking with him on this, and one is a complete convert, and the other guy is like, "What are you doing? These are human beings. And okay, of course, and you don't know what's true and what isn't, but you do see these two, the drama play out between the two brothers, and that's what I think the Man in Black, whose real name was Bruce. No, what was it, Bruce? I forget his real name. We did a joke piece on it.
Oh, okay.
And I think they revealed his name as Bruce or something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, but that's the same dynamic, I think, between the Man in Black, the fanatic versus the rebel.
That's really interesting. Yeah. What was it like working with Titus? Obviously, also a fantastic actor.
So awful. So no, I'm joking. He's actually a really great. He's one of the greatest dudes I know, and I know you hear everybody say that. Like, do you ever hear an actor talk shit about another actor? I don't know.
I think usually they just politely move on from the question if they don't.
Right. Yeah. So you move on. You're diplomatic, but Titus is a genuinely really great guy, and we worked on a film together a few years before that one, and we'd spend our off times at P.F. Chang's drinking wine, and he would, because P.F. Chang's was right down the street from us there in Waikiki, and he would just regale me with stories. He's a great storyteller, and he's a great mimic. He does some of the best Christopher Walken, Al Pacino impersonations. If you ever have him on your show, he can do Al Pacino at all of his stages of life. It's brilliant.
We got to get him for season 6, Rosie.
Yeah.
he's a card, man, and very talented. So I loved working with him.
Yeah. You guys have, I mean, from that first moment on the beach, you have a great rapport. I mean, the hatred that you can feel between these guys, kind of sliced with almost a wit. It's something. It has a magnetic energy on the screen.
Yeah, I think we had a real connection. Ironically, in that first scene, they had him sitting with his back to me, and he's about 10 or 12 feet away from me, and I'm leaning against the log, and there's the fish fire in front of me. And I remember it was windy, and the surf is crashing. I could not hear a word he said. So when he was talking to me, he was more or less talking to himself, and I had to watch when I thought he was done and respond to what I think he said and how I think he said it. And I'm like a Meisner guy, so I don't know if you know Meisner, but I like interacting with somebody and hearing what they're saying and feeling what they're saying. So it was really difficult for me to do that because I couldn't hear anything he was saying.
That's
well,
funny.
you wouldn't guess from watching the thing.
Yeah.
It turned out to be a good scene. I was surprised when I watched it. I'm like, wow, everything it works out. Somehow the craziness of filmmaking congeals into something watchable.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier meeting Michael Emerson, and of course the other big scene in that season 5 finale is when he kills you.
Yep.
Which is this really intense scene, especially for his character Ben, but Jacob is like provoking him and kind of egging him on in this way that's really interesting. What do you remember about filming that scene?
I'll tell you, I have a very distinct memory because I had never really watched Michael Emerson work before, right? And every actor has different ways of rehearsing. I sort of walk through stuff and then gradually sort of work my way into it. So we do what they call a blocking. They don't even do a blocking rehearsal. They call us to the set and they're like, let's just read these words. Let's just say these words to each other. So there's no pressure on anybody. And right out of the frickin' box, he's doing this brilliant speech, fully emotionalized, right in my face. Like, you could have filmed that right there. And I was like, holy shit, this is intimidating, because it was like one of my first times on the set. So I got to meet straight up, somebody who worked very seriously from second one. It wasn't even about warming up. He was already warm and in the mode. And I remember being very moved by him, and I tried to let that be just part of the scene. He emotionalized me because he was so betrayed. He felt, it was like watching a son talk about, his father who was never there, who he gave everything to. And that really, really, really touched me, even though I'm trying to get him to do something to me. It touched me. His pain touched me.
So you say you're trying to get him to do something. So this was one of my questions that I feel differently about every time I watch that scene. Do you want to stop him, or do you really want him to stab you to death? I mean, what do you think Jacob is actually doing there?
I think that has to happen. I think the death has to happen for it to go the places where it needs to go, for Jacob to have the power to communicate to everybody the way he does. That's just my own take. So I do think he was picking a fight. I do think he was doing that. And the dynamic for me, from what I remember, that was fun to act, was how much Michael made me feel about him and his sorrow while I was picking the fight. So I thought it was a contradiction that was sort of fun to be in the moment. I didn't plan it that way. It just sort of happened based on what he was doing.
I like that. That helps me understand the scene, honestly, because when he asks, "What about me? What was so wrong with me?" and you just look at him and say, "What about you?" I mean, clearly it's, you're twisting the knife into him, as it were, before he twists the knife into you. But then once he stabs and you fall, into him, like, you do look quite startled. Like it actually does look emotionally very painful to you to have to go through with that.
Sucks to die.
Yeah,
it sucks to die. But I mean, and I don't even know if I'm reflecting what was going on in the moment, or this is just my memory of it. I don't know. And I don't know if Jack would say the same thing. Was Jack directing that one?
Yeah, he was.
I think Jack directed that one. And I don't know if he would say that. I don't know if his interpretation would be that way. Jack, like any good director, sort of lets you just be and find your way. And every once in a while, they might throw something out there to you. And with Jacob, it was really like seeing what sticks. I don't know, because the character's so mysterious. And I just would try. I just tried to stick to the scene's telling me this is what's happening. This is what I'll do, and let's see what happens out of that. And the rest of the mystery was just I just figured you guys would do that work for me. Watching it, you knew the mystery more than I did. I just know what the moment is.
Well, that's one of the great things about Lost, is you can have about 12 different interpretations for anything.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, not a lot of shows like that, but Lost was one of them.
It's probably all valid. Yeah.
One thing I noticed rewatching a bunch of your scenes, including that one, is like, when they first come into the giant foot where you're waiting for them in there. I assume you didn't really film it in a giant foot, but as you see on the screen,
right.
you live at the bottom of the statue. You're in a rocking chair and you're kind of hunched over and kind of steepling your fingers a little bit. And then I saw there were a few examples of that, like in the 6th season when you're talking to Jorge Reyes in the temple, you're kind of hunched over by the edge of this pool, kind of. I don't know. I wondered if there was something physical, like some kind of physical affectation you were trying to bring, because there were just a bunch of moments where you were like kind of hunched and brooding, and almost, I don't want to say like not quite Gollum like, but it was a little interesting. You weren't just standing up straight, looking at people.
Not consciously, I couldn't tell you what was going on at the moment that inspired me to do that. But I just sort of. normally when I work on a part, especially one that has such a deep history like that, I do a lot of imagination work, a lot of journaling and fantasizing and thinking about things, and this one was a lot more free form and sort of in the moment and letting the moment take me wherever it did. There might have been a lot of takes where I wasn't doing that at all, and they might have thought that was whatever was in that scene made more sense to them.
Yeah,
I don't even remember that scene. I don't remember it.
The second one that I referenced was in the sixth season, and you were appearing as a ghost to Hurley and sort of guiding him on this mission to go to the lighthouse.
Yeah.
Yeah, which happens a few times, I think, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. All of you. I assume, by the way, that once they killed you at the end of the fifth season, you probably figured that was it, right? I mean, I imagine they didn't tell you you'd be coming back as a ghost all those times.
I think I knew that I was going to be in. I knew I was going to be in a certain number of episodes, so I knew that I was going to be at the end of the fifth season and then the last season.
Interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't always work out that way, but yeah.
There was a scene that you filmed with Zuleika Robinson, who plays the character Ilana, where she's in a hospital bed and you're telling her you need her help.
I spoke Russian in that, right?
That's right. You spoke Russian and
spoke a wide variety of languages
and Korean in that episode.
Oh boy, yeah, I remember that.
I take it you don't speak Russian or Korean.
Don't speak Russian or Korean, so I was nervous. But go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. No, the only question was maybe that character, Zuleika Robinson's character, Ilana. I think that was the only scene you shared with her. She was a regular cast in the sixth season, and there was all this speculation about who she was and what she was doing there, and it never really got explored. I think she said at one point that she was supposed to be your daughter, but that never came out on screen. Do you have any recollection of anyone talking with you about that character or her being your daughter or anything like that?
None.
Interesting.
None. But I do remember getting my Russian tapes and my Korean tapes and having to learn that dialogue.
Well, Daniel Dae Kim says you speak excellent Korean on the show.
He's very kind. And luckily I had him guiding me because I was like, look, guys, I'm nervous as heck because I think fans got at him because he didn't speak fluent Korean, right? But Sun did. Was her character's name Sun?
Yeah. Sun, yes. Played by you.
She spoke perfect, flawless Korean, so I was like looking at her like, just bear with me, and I let's just pray to God we get through this, okay? And it was a little nerve wracking, because I had to give them a blessing in Korean, and it was like a page and a half of dialogue in Korean.
Oh, jeez.
And I'd never done anything like that before, so it was a little scary. And Daniel was just really, really supportive. He's really one of the nicest guys. I mean, because when you're coming onto a set, even for a character that becomes established in a way, you're coming on to a set where people have been on the show 5 years.
Yeah.
They're very comfortable with everybody they're working with, and every once in a while you get a guy like Daniel and they were all very accommodating and very nice, but you get somebody who goes out of his way to just make you feel at home. And, and that's when you're a series regular, it's sort of important that you do that, because a person coming on for a short time they just have that little moment, and you have all these years that you've built up sympathy and love from your fan base. And these people are just coming in for a brief amount of time. And that adds a little something to the work that makes it difficult. So I really appreciated him being supportive.
Yeah. One of the other actors who you work with a great deal on the show is Nestor Carbonell, who played Richard. There's at least one whole episode where we sort of get Richard's backstory, hundreds of years of it. And Jacob is present throughout that episode. What do you remember about working with Nestor or kind of creating that relationship that spanned centuries?
He's like a tremendous athlete, because I had to throw him around on the beach, and he took all the falls like a judo guy. I think he wrestled or something, and that's how he knew how to do it. But he was really physically adept and very much better than I at that stuff, and very, very serious. I also remember the scene with the wine. we did this long take where they had a tracking shot behind him. They had tracks behind him, and the camera's sort of going off of his back and onto me and going back and forth like this. And but it always has him sort of in frame but it's on my angle. And we did this great scene, and they say cut, and they're like, well, we have to go again. I was like, why? That was fantastic. Nestor had a praying mantis on the back of his head that was about that. It was the biggest praying mantis I'd ever seen. And it was there through the entire scene. I didn't see it until he turned around, and it was sitting there. And what do I remember about
It's amazing.
The essence of the scene? I mean, I'm sort of explaining to him the dynamic of the island, and I'm sort of bringing him into, if I remember...
it's almost like you're hiring him to do do Jacob's bidding.
That's what it is. It's like, I want him to be the intermediary between me and other people. Like he's the Christ, I'm the God, and he's the intermediary that deals with people. I mean, I remember that scene, and I remember how tragic his story was, and how he thought he was in hell, and if I was the devil, and ironically, I was playing the devil at the same time in another show called Supernatural. So
yes.
Oh, yeah.
when he would ask me, he's like, "Are you the devil?" Inside, I'd be like, "I am." But I just it sort of made me laugh internally. So I mean, I remember this, just the nuts and bolts of the scene of convincing him to be my, helper, so to speak.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that Mark says here is really the heart of what we've been talking about, right? He says Jacob saw his life as a cog, a tool for this wider purpose. Like, Jacob's being used by the island too, right? He's in service to something as well, even though he is calling the shots, and whether he actually is sort of receiving messages or whatever, I don't know that particularly matters, because he believes he's in service of this, I hesitate to use the word greater good, because is it good? I don't know, but in service of this greater purpose, and that's what's sort of guiding his decisions.
Yeah, I really liked the comment that he made about himself and the man in black, and how their mother was a fanatic, and he says, one's a convert, the other's a rebel. And I think that, those are sort of two sides of the same coin here. I mean, neither of them is coming from a neutral place, right? I mean, they're both fanatics in their own way, and I think that speaks to what you're saying here, that he's taken this upon himself. He sees it as, his life is, as a tool. He thinks this is his destiny, but he's made that choice, right? I mean,
just as John Locke does in the first 3 seasons.
Indeed. Just as John Locke does. I also enjoyed talking about Richard. He's the Christ, I'm the God. I thought that was such a good metaphor.
Yes.
But Jacob does see himself as a god. He really does.
Yeah, he does.
And as we're going to learn next year, that's an origin story that he's kind of created for himself with help from his mother.
Yeah. Yeah. I also want to call out the fact that Mark and Titus Welliver, who played the Man in Black, used to hang out at P.F. Chang's. If you remember when we spoke to Francois Chow, who played Pierre Chang way back in season 2, I believe, one of the things he wrote into Pierre Chang's origin story was that after he left the Dharma Initiative, he moved to the United States and opened an American Chinese restaurant called P.F. Chang's.
I forgot about that. That's so great.
I think about that all the time.
That's so great. People ought to go back and listen to that conversation we did with him in season 2. And also, since we're talking about her this week, by the way, Fionnuala Flanagan, who plays Miss Hawking, we had on the show earlier this season. But, the Dr. Chang stuff, we kind of got lost in our philosophy debate back there. But some great scenes with him this week. I loved his interactions with Faraday.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting here that Chang's first reaction is to think he's messing with him. Like, he thinks that, Daniel was down in the mine and overheard him saying something about time travel and is now just, fucking with him. Like, do people in the Dharma Initiative do this? And this goes back to your point about this being, a very strange group of people. Like, who would do that? Who would say, oh, this is your son, I'm from the future, isn't that weird that his name is Miles? Like, I don't know, man. That seems like not a very good joke.
No, I'm with you. It speaks to the just sort of like general tomfoolery and shenanigans that are happening all over Dharma all the time.
Indeed.
No, I mean, when Faraday drops on him, Miles is your son, it's just like, man, this guy is just blowing shit up. Like, we've spent this whole time trying so hard to hide everything, and Faraday just shows up off the sub and is like, I'm from the future. Miles is your son. It's so fun to watch. It's one of the things I love about this episode. I also, by the way, talking about Dharma shenanigans and tomfoolery, Stuart Radzinski in this episode now has goons with guns and pretty much stages a coup of, Dharma's military, I would say, by capturing Sawyer. And, by the end of this season, I think he's arguably, done a coup on the whole Dharma initiative and takes over for Horace. Gets back to that listener who called about the fascinating Dharma leadership dynamics. And I think that's very much on display this week. And also gives Radzinski the opportunity, as we discussed with Eric Lang, to shout the amazing line,
What the hell's going on? Just got shot by a physicist?
which is one of the great lines of Lost.
It is. And it's funny that, as we see Radzinski ascendant in these last couple episodes, he is the person who is sort of maybe has like the purest belief in what the Dharma Initiative is trying to do. Like his whole devotion to protecting the secrets of the station that they're building when Saeed is captive, and his devotion to, why is Hurley here? He can't be back here. These things are secret and they're too important. Like, he kind of seems to be the only person who cares very much about that stuff. And is enforcing it from a place of like belief rather than, I'm just doing my job or whatever. And maybe that's why Radzinski is the guy who ends up down in the hatch.
I was going to say the same thing. I remember we theorized back when we were talking with Eric about how maybe he felt guilt about what happened. But I think this is an equally compelling, if not more so, explanation that he was just such a fanatic that he felt like this has to happen and nobody can be entrusted with it but me.
Right.
Stu, talking about leadership, one comment that I just meant to bring up earlier when we were chatting about Juliet, Sawyer once again this week just shows what an incredible leadership figure he has become. I mean, as this beautiful life he's built is just completely falling apart around him, like, yes, eventually he's going to take his anger out on Jack, but for now, he's sits them all down, leads the meeting, and just tells them the facts. All right, people, party's over. I know y'all just showed up. The rest of us have been here for the past 3 years. This is our home. The last thing I want to do is leave, but we ain't got no choice. And I'm just thinking, if I'm Sawyer in this moment, I'm just going to be so incredibly pissed off at these people for coming back and fucking shit up that I'm going to be in no position to be sitting and trying to lead the making of smart, logical, sound decisions. Like, I'm going to be, yelling at, I don't think I would resort to physical violence myself because I'm not that type of person, but I'm kind of amazed that he's not, like punching them all in the face here. Instead, he's sitting them down and trying to figure out, what can we do now? What do we have to do next? It's so impressive that he's able to handle it in this way. Yeah.
And we know based on his later actions, as you say, that he is pissed at Jack and company for coming back and messing up that this nice life that they built. I think Sawyer very happily would have lived many years in the Dharma Initiative with Juliet if he had had the opportunity. And yeah, it sucks, but you're right. He rises to the moment and says, no time for that now. Our sort of immediate problem is that Phil is tied up in the closet, and Daniel Faraday's back for some reason and is saying all this shit, and clearly we have to leave. It's just a matter of how.
Yeah. Phil in the closet is also low-key hilarious this whole episode, but Jack, Phil, Jack. Oh boy, it's a great episode. It's such a great episode. Am I crazy for thinking it's as good as it is? Am I overestimating it, or did you love it too?
No, it's great. It's really, really, really well written, if I may say so myself, not being a TV writer. I mean, there are just I talked about this a little bit just with how Daniel's monologue sets up the end of the season, but there's also just the bits about, the episode opens with Penny in the hospital, and you're like, oh yeah, Desmond got shot. What's happening with that? And then Eloise shows up, and it all builds very nicely, and then at the end of the episode they return to that, and you get this nice moment of like, oh, thank God, at least Desmond's okay. And every time Desmond and Penny are on screen together, I like tear up. It cannot be helped. And they get this really nice reunion, and Desmond says, I said I would never leave you and all that, and you do get to be like, oh, at least somebody is happy.
Yep. The construction of that is brilliant, how they open and close with those characters.
Yeah, it's really nice.
It's really brilliant. And by the way, you mentioned the writing. I checked because I said I would look this up earlier. The Incident was unsurprisingly written by Damon and Carlton, and this episode was written by Eddie Kitsis and Adam Horowitz. So that doesn't necessarily disprove your theory that those two lines that I quoted might have been crafted by the same person, but at the very least, those weren't the names of the writers on the episodes were different. Yes, you seem so wowed by that. That's great. We will be back next week with Follow the Leader. No real centric character in that episode. I think Lostpedia kind of categorizes it as a Richard-centric episode, which I've always had questions about. But regardless, we will be back with Mark Pellegrino and more from our conversation about Jacob. As Sammy mentioned earlier, much discussion in this episode. If you would like to leave us a hot take about these subjects or any others, you can give us a call at 9546-DHARMA. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast and on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast. We love it when you rate and review us on your podcast app of choice. Please give us a rating. Let us know what you think of the show. Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth. And we will be back next week. Namaste.